creation research with some of the guests here this evening. In fact, I was at work. I haven't seen them in quite some time. This is quite a surprise. Anyway, so yeah, and I worked had a secular job where I worked in the oil and gas industry for 7 years as a geologist. Got saved during that time, and then heard about creation science, and to me, it was an eye-opener of such an extent that the conviction has never left me that the evolution and the entire worldview that's part of it is not just in conflict with the Bible, it's diametrically opposed to it. At every turn, it's opposed to it. And that conviction just has never left me. So anyway, I talk tonight about vulgar notions of the universal flood. Right? I took that quote from Martin Rudwick's book. Martin Rudwick wrote a book on fossils. He's considered to be the premier history of science guy with respect to geology, at least. And anyway, and he had a piece of artwork in there as called from 1760, Vain Speculation Undeceived by Sense, right? And you see there's two figures in there, right? The younger lad is pointing to the rocks. He's pointing to the fossils in the rocks. In other words, the seashells up on the mountaintop. How did they get there? And this fellow here is vain speculation. Now, who do you suppose vain speculation is? Vain speculation was the predominant view about fossils at that time, that they formed in place spontaneously, or else they were some kind of mystical phenomenon of some sort. And it took a flood geologist to break them out of that mold. Anyway, so that's where I get this, and that quote appeared twice in Martin Rudwick's book, and as a condescending view of flood geology, but he gives grudging credit in his book, which is a fantastic book. Anyway, so again, and currently I work part-time at Southern California Seminary. I think somebody asked about that, where I teach scientific models of origins there, mainly to undergraduate students, sometimes to graduate level students. And the kind of the slides I've put together tonight are things I've been teaching students for years, and I've just kind of put it all together in one talk. And so this is you get to be the first ones to endure this tonight. So thank you for coming out. And I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I came to Christ as an adult, and it was after quite a search, and it was quite a dramatic turn for me. And so I know how to think as a professional geologist on both sides of the fence, so to speak. And so that's why I like this subject. I think we've got very good evidence for a global flood. So that's and so I'm with. I also serve with Logos Research Associates, which is probably the premier group today in terms of research scientists who are doing creation research. Yeah, and they're low key. They have there's like a very low profile. It's like a network. There's no headquartered organization, but they do take donations and support for the research. It's some good projects underway. But they quietly are doing their work, and they quietly have influence in the universities and so on. And it's a very good thing. And so I'm affiliated with them, Southern California Seminary also. And I'm currently working with Jamin Lee, who leads creation tours with a group called Association for Creation Truth at Los Angeles. And so that's exciting work. Anybody wants to know about that, I'll tell you about that. And talking about the seminary, we are doing a Grand Canyon trip this summer. And myself, I'm going to be doing the geology part. And I want you to know about it, because we plan to fill up a 50-passenger bus with people. And but it's word of mouth mainly. We don't have any big marketing. But if you know people who would like to camp at Mather Campground on South Rim for 2 nights, we have another guy who brings out a grill. We have group meals and stuff, and we it's just 2 nights at the canyon and back again to Southern California, and the whole thing is under $300 for you, and it's a good trip.
What weekend?
What time?
Is it weekend?
This is coming up in the summer, yeah, good, it's coming up in the summer, July 4th weekend, which is the weekend just prior to the 4th, so you're back before the 4th, which is I think Monday. We get back Sunday night. Anyway, so that's, I got flyers in case you're interested. Please take them and tell your friends. All right. So, let's see if we can get started here. And I'd like to ask you some questions. I want to focus on the biblical record, on the historical record, on the geological record, and then make some summary and ask the question, so what, okay? The biblical record, what would you expect to find if there really was a global flood? I'd like to try to answer that question. Number two, in terms of the way it's been treated in history, what would you expect to find? That's number two. Number three, how about evidences, geologic evidences for the flood? I can give you 11 evidences for the flood, all right? And then we can try to wrap it up, see if we can get through all this. All right, so with God's help, we'll do it. How about we just stop or pray for a moment? Lord, I pray that you'd get glory out of this night. I pray that you'd be magnified. And I pray that you'd get, you'd be pleased to open our understanding and give me the freedom to declare your great and awesome works in history, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. You know, there's a new book out. I've got a copy of it here. It's called Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. Right? And it's going to be very effective as a diatribe against flood geology. And notice the title of it, Can Noah's Flood Explain the Grand Canyon? And this is, it took 22 years to respond to the book on the right there, which is called Grand Canyon Monument to Catastrophe. Right? And this book is put out mainly by the work of one group called Solid Rock Lectures. And these are guys, the purpose of this ministry, they're well funded. The purpose of this ministry is to convert particularly seminaries and Christian leaders to abandon this archaic and outdated business of young earth and flood geology. It's been thoroughly refuted, they claim. Right? And the book is mainly a diatribe against flood geology. Amidst all of the kind of anti-creationist rhetoric that you might expect to find in a book like this, there are good arguments embedded within it that are some of the best stated arguments against the global flood that I've seen yet in print. And so it's going to be very effective. And a lot of people will not be able to see that the illogical arguments, the straw men, those kind of things that are presented in there, because it's done very, very effectively. It's a group of, it's about 10 or 12 different authors, several of them with PhDs, different fields, different subjects. And major funding for the book came from the American Scientific Affiliation, which has long been associated with theistic evolution, and the John Templeton Foundation. Both those organizations I would not call Christian friendly in the slightest, right? Yeah.
Is that the John Templeton that used to be with Billy Graham
Yep.
and then recanted his faith?
Yep, that's the same guy.
Yeah, he's the one, yeah. Yeah, and he's got deep pockets,
I
apparently.
thought he just passed away.
Oh, he's dead, yeah, he's dead a while.
Yeah, but the foundation.
Oh, the foundation, oh, yeah.
Foundation lives on.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
all right. So I want to look at, I'm going to focus primarily on Grand Canyon tonight, and I want to give you evidences for why I think this works, but I want to take you through some of these steps about the biblical record. What does the Bible say about the flood in particular? How was this treated in history, and then we'll get to the evidences. All right. You know, there was several years ago, a big tsunami that swept onto Japan, remember? And those people didn't know what hit them when it came, you know? And anybody remember how that got started?
Earthquake.
There's movement on the seafloor, there's an upheaval on the seafloor. How did Noah's flood get started?
People
Upheaval on the seafloor. Yeah, think about that. And I'm kind of stunned that, you know, you can find things like, this is a newspaper clipping I found years ago. And I made a scan of it because it was so interesting. And it was in the Sunday newspaper. Remember when people used to read newspapers? Yeah. And, yeah, and, you know, hey, look, what a deal, $10, you can get, you know, Robin Hood, Little Red Riding Hood, you know, The Ugly Duckling, Jack and the Beanstalk, and look at that, Noah's Ark, you know? And I'm convinced most Christians would never even blink at that. It would get right past them. Why? Because we're so used to teaching our young people in the churches, oh, well, Noah's flood was just like a picnic on the lake kind of thing, you know, with the animals playing on the deck and all that rubbish, you know? And we don't even know that we're teaching those kids that, look, man, this was a serious business, this flood, right? Anyway, and when the kids get older, they notice in your churches, don't they? Oh, the grown-ups never talk about this, do they? Oh, it must be like Santa Claus. Like we learned about Santa Claus when we were young kids, right? And now that the grown-ups don't talk about it because the pastor says it's controversial, you know, therefore, this too is fairy tale, and we wonder why they're jettisoning the faith. You know? 2 Peter chapter 3 is probably the most important passage for a geologist to first off, a person that wants to look at scripture on this. Now, I'm certain you've read through this, but I want to focus on one section here. Peter is giving a warning about the last days. These are Peter's last words. He knew he was going to be crucified. He knew he was going to die soon, right? And as far as we know, these are his last words. And he says, know this first of all, verse 3, right? In other words, of primary importance, that in the last days, mockers will come with their mocking, following their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming, that is Christ's coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues as it was from the beginning of creation. It goes on to say that people who push this particular philosophy, whatever that means, where, you know, everything continues as it was in the beginning. You know, look out for those people, because they're going to deny creation and deny the flood both by that philosophy. What philosophy is that? I'll tell you what, I've seen on page 1 of any geology textbook you want to find. It's right there. The present is the key to the past. You've heard those kind of cliches, right? It's the same thing. Nothing new ever happens around here. Everything happens slowly and gradually. You know, the seasons come, the seasons go, the rivers drain the sea, you know, etc. He says, watch out for that philosophy. It's out to get you. You cannot believe in an old earth apart from believing that philosophy right there. Forget science. That philosophy is where you get an old earth. Any argument for an old earth you want to name depends on projecting present rates into the past. It's presumptuous speculation about the past. And man thinks he can do this, and God says, no. I have acted suddenly in the past with the flood and with creation, with other events, and you know what? It's going to happen suddenly when Christ comes again, right? And so the reason I get excited about this whole subject is I think the reason that the Apostle Peter got excited about it, and the reason is this: people are out to rip you off of the blessed hope. We're to be looking for the Master's return. He will come, and he will come suddenly, and we don't know the day or the hour, right? And if the devil can diminish that hope, or else even eliminate it, well, that's what he's trying to do, right? He's out to rip you off. And I looked up the Wikipedia version of what they say about uniformitarianism. Look at this. Uniformitarianism held that the present is the key to the past, and that all things continued as they were from the indefinite past. Almost word for word with what Peter warned here. I think that's profound. I don't know. Okay, some important texts on the flood. Let's look at a few. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered together in one place, let the dry land appear. Now this isn't the flood here, that's referring to creation week. Day 3, when God separated the waters below, right? The land went up, apparently it went up, and the dry land appeared. If that involved moving water, you might predict there would be erosion and sedimentation. I'm a geologist, okay? I'm a nerd. I think about these things. Right? Genesis 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, second month, 17th day of the month. Why does he give you those details? He's trying to impress something on you.
It's historical.
Historical, exactly. Right? This isn't a fairy tale, right? Like Washington crossing the Delaware, it was historical. On the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, the floodgates of the sky were open. Great deep, everybody agrees, was the ocean basins. All the fountains of the great deep suggest there was openings on the seafloor. And the word burst open is very colorful. That's the geologic word for faulting. Ripping of the earth's floor is what initiated the flood, or at least that was part of it. And the floodgates of the sky were opened. That has geological importance. Genesis 7:19 through 20, and the water prevailed more and more on the earth. So all the mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. Not just the mountains, and not just the high mountains, and not just all the high mountains, and not just but all the high mountains under all the heavens were covered. Quadruple universal statement. Do you think God went out of his way to tell us this was a global flood? If there was a global flood, I would expect to find marks of that flood on the earth. Psalm 104, just a few more verses, we'll get moving. Important passage. This is referring to most people believe this is referring to the flood. Verse 7, at thy rebuke they fled, that is, the waters fled. At the sound of thy thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose. The valleys sank down to the place which thou didst establish for them. Mountain building is something that marks the end of the flood. Now that should be a signature in the rock record as a geologist, all right? That gets my attention right there. All right? Matthew 24, and this is just underlining the importance of this for a Christian. It's not just silliness. I'm talking about evidence for the flood. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For in those days which were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, they were marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. That day is coming. And when the flood is talked about in Scripture, it frequently occurs in connection with apocalyptic future events as well, right? The coming of the Lord. Don't miss that. You diminish the importance of the flood, you diminish Christ's second coming. They go together.
In fact, you might miss it altogether.
You might, yeah. Particularly if you're persuaded that everything continues as it was in the beginning. That tomorrow will be just like today, only better. All that kind of rubbish, Christ didn't come again, come on. And this is just something I constructed just for fun. Don't take this as important or anything. But, I've got arbitrary elevation in feet here. I just tried to map out some of the events given in the flood account. On day 40, the ark was lifted up. All right, day 40 of the flood. By the time day 50 rolled around, the ark landed on ground, on solid rock. And the peak of the flood apparently occurred between day 40 and day 150. Now the flood was a year long, right? So 150 is what? How many months is that? That's 5 months? Right. So the picture I get is that the onset of the flood was rapid. The ark got grounded, and Noah was told to stay on the ark for another several months before he was allowed to get out. I suspect it was because the earth was still too violent to even venture out in that stuff. And the ark itself was a shelter to stay in. Because if the kind of violence that I think accompanied the flood was going on, it was still quaking and shaking, 5 geologic predictions from the biblical flood. I might expect there to be thick, sedimentary layers that don't have animal fossils in them. All right? Think about that. Why? Because on day 3 of that creation week, if there was water movement and there was sediment forming, life wasn't around yet. God hadn't created life yet. Number 2, I'd expect there might be some indication of the abrupt start of the flood. I think the flood, first of all, was marked by this upheaval, especially if it's on the seafloor, especially if it's big earthquakes.
What about fossils?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Come on now. Hang on. Be patient. Yeah.
But they shouted.
Yeah, good.
You can even make them yourself.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we're gonna get to fossils, yeah. I like fossils. In fact, I'm becoming one pretty quickly. Anyway, I might also expect at the start, we're talking about just the start of the flood, we're not talking about the fossils yet, a worldwide erosion surface where the continents were scoured flat as a result of this event. Could it be that there is such a thing in the earth today? You know? In geology, in real life geology. Number 3, I might expect in the flood individual layers of continent-wide extent. I might expect rapidly buried plants and animals, ideal conditions for fossilization right there. Right? I might expect a distinctive succession of strata deposited without any real interruption, any significant interruption of the layers. And I might even expect supervolcanoes as well. But the end of the flood would have been marked by a unique episode of worldwide mountain uplift. Oh, this is really fun. I like this. You know, deposits prone to soft sediment movement. If you've got a whole pile of mud and sand and silt that was deposited as a result of the flood, and then there's mountain uplift, you better believe there's going to be soft sediment, flowage and bending and so on. And then a gradual decline of volcanism, earthquake activity, and let's just skip right past that stuff for now. Okay, in terms of history, how you doing? You still with me? Okay, good. We haven't even gotten warmed up yet. Right? In terms of history, these are, I tried to put this together, historical, crude kind of presentation on how the flood has been treated in history. Around 500 BC, Aristotle believed in an eternal earth, and that its ongoing processes, the rivers run to the ocean, and the sediment builds, and then it turns into mountains, and all of this. He believed that kind of stuff, and he also believed in spontaneous generation. It's interesting, that was right around the time when the scriptures were being recorded, or a lot of it was, we think. From the period 0 to 300 AD, the early church, there were flood evangelists during that time. I want to talk about that. Yep. And from 300 to 1800, the worldwide flood of the young earth was pretty much a widespread view. That was pretty much the default view throughout that period of time. There were always exceptions. You can always point to those. And then something happened, 1730 to 1800, the Enlightenment reduces the flood to, quote, religion. It's no longer considered anything to be discussed among scientists from that point onward, because it's religion. It's kind of like Santa Claus, get rid of it, And then from this period, uniformitarian geology reigned supreme, especially in America. And then 1960 to 2014, there's been a resurgence of thinking differently about the flood, thinking differently about flood geology in particular. Okay, so just to go through quickly, Aristotle was a strict gradualist. He was puzzled by seashells on the mountaintops. He had his own views on that, I won't go into. But rather than a global flood, he believed the fossils grew in place. Right? You had a period here where Tertullian and other church fathers, they used fossils, and they would press their atheist friends into a corner and say, how do you explain those seashells up on the mountaintop if there wasn't a global flood? And if there was a global flood, what does that really say about God's hatred for sin? And by the way, where does that leave you, my friend? And have I told you about Christ? See, they go straight from fossils to the gospel.
Is there any better way to go?
This is fossil evangelism. Something like that, right? That's what Tolkien is acknowledged to have done that, and or recognized to have done that. And Mark Rudwick says this, a quote from him in there. But let's keep moving. flood geology really got established, not just flood geology, but the science of geology that all geologists recognize today was founded by a nobody. Who's ever heard of Nicholas Steno? I mean, everybody's heard of Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle and the others. Nicholas Steno was the father of stratigraphy, paleontology, and mineralogy, unquestionably. He was also a flood geologist. He believed, and he broke up all of Earth's rocks into pre-flood, flood, and post-flood kind of a scheme, right?
What were his dates approximately? Was he the same century as Boyle and those?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
1600s,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Yeah, his main work was in 1667, was the real significant work of his, you know.
What
Yeah.
is stratigraphy? Is that related to the strata?
Yeah, exactly. That's where, that's the word root, the strata, which is the layers, right? The layers of rock. How did the layers get there? It's no word. And then following Steno, from there to about 1850, flood geology was a dominant movement. It wasn't universally accepted, but it was certainly a dominant movement. Woodward, other names were involved in this. John Hoesch. Was it John Hoesch? Hoesch was a famous scientist. I forget his first name. Those scientists, you know, this was debated, and it was a big time of talk. It was seriously considered as the way to understand geology, and they wrestled with that. And, yeah, question?
Yeah, that last quote down there by Rudwig
Yeah.
leads me to ask this question. You had mentioned that at one time there was an argument that there was a thought that the fossils grew in place.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the definition in that sentence of grew, when he says that he encouraged the acceptance of the organic interpretation.
Right.
So when they're saying they grew in place, at that time, did they think the fossils were non-organic, that they were like crystalline, that they grew like a crystal from mineral deposits?
Yeah, well, you had different views. Some of the Neoplatonists believed that.
Mhm.
That was one camp, and the Aristotelians believed that you know, perhaps when the rain falls or something, and there's seeds that were in the ocean, and the seeds fall into the crack in the rocks, and those are seeds for fish and seeds for clams and so on. And then from those seeds, they actually grew in place and
And died
became,
in place.
and apparently got mineralized in place, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, something like that. That was Aristotle's view, if I get it right. Yeah, and Nicholas Steno was the one his chief contribution, of course, was he completely overthrew the non-organic origin for fossils. In other words, he said these had to have been living things, and therefore the ones we see on the mountaintops, they had to have been the result of the flood. He made that connection, you know.
Before you change the frame,
Sure.
you have to give us the pronunciation for the D word next to the last line.
The D word in the next.
Yes.
Diluvius.
Oh, he was, yeah, the diluvialist is the same as a flood geologist, yeah. Same thing, yeah, the diluvium or the, yeah. And then came a big movement in Europe called the Enlightenment. I usually say the Enlightenment was the time when the lights went out in Europe. Because that marked the end of the scientific revolution, officially secular, a lot of secular sources say this. It also marked the end of the Protestant Reformation. It was, and you had, it was led by a lot of the French humanists, Rousseau and Descartes, and particularly some other names like this, Benoit de Maillet. This guy had a full-on naturalistic evolution scheme, all worked up, this is 150 years before Darwin, right?
mhm.
Including millions of years, the whole bit, just by speculation, just by armchair speculation, that's all, right? And Comte de Buffon is much better known, and he was a strict, he had uniformitarianism down pat. There's a quote from him right here. In order to judge what has happened, one need only examine what is happening today. Events which occur every day, movements which succeed one another, etc., without interruption, you know, these are our causes and reasons. In other words, put away any idea of big catastrophes.
But,
Put that
but
away.
sometimes they happen, look at Mount St. Helens.
Oh, you don't, yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
And yes, that's
Well, we're
happening
not
today,
thinking of that.
and that's
Sure.
happening today too. I mean,
Sure.
those things happen.
Yeah, we have catastrophes that happen today, and that's good. It's good to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so these were, now, the French Enlightenment in particular ended in the natural outworking of the Enlightenment ideas, this idea that every man is right in his own eyes, everyone does what's right for himself and all that. It ended, of course, in the bloodbath of the French Revolution, which was a violently anti-Christian movement.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the reason you never heard of this guy in particular a lot, maybe some of him, not much though. The reason you don't hear about these guys as the founders of evolution, I think, is a good reason.
Mm-hmm.
Their writings were dripping with anti-Christian hatred. These were vigorously anti-Christian people, and that's where that's what motivated them, I think, to dream up these stories. Why do they want to replace God as creator, and get away with the idea of a judge, this kind of global judgment?
We have them on our streets today.
We have, yeah, you know it. And then came the British, the ones who followed on the heels of the Frenchies. Now the British, they were petrified that this revolution was going to spread across the channel. And they were, they liked the humanist ideas of the French though. They liked the humanist ideas, but they didn't like the bloodshed, right? So what are we going to do? Well, James Hutton, he's considered the father of deep time, the founder of modern geology. He gave no credit whatsoever to the early French naturalists in his writings. And he believed the Earth was this eternal machine of endless cycles that changes gradually. He's a lot like Aristotle. He didn't believe just in an old Earth, he believed the Earth was eternal, been here forever. Yeah, and so that's James Hutton. So he took the French ideas, really, and kind of sanitized them and made it Christian friendly, you see, to Europe. Now, not many people read his writings, but the one who followed on his heels, they read a lot about Charles Lyell, because Lyell was a skillful writer. He was trained as a lawyer, okay, before he was a geologist. And he was a skillful writer, and he persuaded people to believe in his present as the key to the past business. And ever since Lyell, the geological community has been persuaded that the Earth is millions of years old.
But what about people like Pasteur and Lord Kelvin and
Right.
some of those people? They weren't.
Right.
They were not against the Christian thought.
Oh, of course not. No. Yeah.
They were geologists.
Yeah. Anyway,
They were scientists though.
so ever since Lyell, we've had this now. And notice people believed in an Earth of millions of years old long before radioisotope dating came along. Madame Curie didn't even come on the scene yet to discover radioactivity. Right? Interesting. How did they know the Earth is millions of years old? You project present rates into the past. That's what you do. You play this game, and that's how you get your millions of years. Has nothing to do with science whatsoever. Has everything to do with this kind of presumptive attitude that there's never been any big catastrophes in Earth history. Everything happens slowly and gradually. So to explain a layer of sandstone 200 feet thick must have taken the oceans a long time to build up, sand grain, one grain at a time. You see, that's the idea. Well, guess what? Geologists all agree the continents were once underwater. They do, because the evidence in places like Grand Canyon is staggering. That the Earth is underwater. They all believe it happened. They just say it happened slowly and gradually, that's all. And so when you see park rangers giving a talk in Grand Canyon, and the public asks them, you usually have three big questions when you get to Grand Canyon. How did the thing get eroded? Usually that's the first question people have. How old are those rocks in the bottom of Grand Canyon? Are they really billions of years? And the other thing is, how did those layers get there anyway? And I want to focus mainly on that today, on how did those layers get there that make up the walls of Grand Canyon. because they're not just in the walls, they extend underground and behind the walls too, right? Long distances. Well, the public asks the ranger has their standard reply. Well, we know how those layers got there. Slowly and gradually, the oceans advance on the continents. They deposit one layer, and then they retreat. Sometimes they stayed out for 5, 10 million years.
Incursion.
And then they come back again, deposit the next layer, and they go out again. In and out, in and out. Everything is mellow, man. No big flood, no catastrophic, nothing. That's the way Earth history is shaped up, you see? And how do we know that? Charles Lyell told us. That's how we know. I mean, it says that's what we're doing, right? Okay, so that's kind of the backdrop. I'd like to focus on this Grand Canyon region. We're in the Pacific, we're in the southwest of the U.S. here. And there's a region here called the Colorado Plateau, right? And the Colorado Plateau is kind of interesting because it's internally drained. The whole thing is disc shaped. It's a high elevation. It's not truly a plateau, but it's an elevated region. And it drains internally, and there's only one exit. And it exits here at Grand Canyon. The Colorado River comes out of it. Right? The thing looks like it was once filled with water. I think that's got to be connected with how Grand Canyon got eroded. I think it was eroded quickly. But we're not going to get to that today. Let's focus on the Grand Canyon right there in that box. I want to give you a satellite image of that red box there. And that's kind of what it looks like. It's not a great picture, but you can see Lake Powell up here. This is the Utah-Arizona border here. This is elevated terrain here. So the river drains from the Rocky Mountains, comes out of Lake Powell, Marble Gorge, and then begins to cut westward to form Grand Canyon, and it exits out here. This is Las Vegas, Lake Mead. And so the big mystery is how did the river go across the mountain? That's because it had to cut across that. And that's fascinating. And geologists are completely humbled these days. They used to think they had it all figured out, but they're back to the drawing board. They've got so much contradictory information. They don't know. But I think it was a sudden thing. Anyway, if you take a slice through the earth like that black line, that we're going to take a slice through the earth and get a profile look of it, and this is kind of what it looks like. There's Grand Canyon on the south, and to the north you've got the tablelands that extend into Utah called the Grand Staircase. You've got Bryce and Zion, and the layers here are each unique and different, and it explains the beauty of the landscape out there. When you come around one bend and you see beautiful rocks, and then you come around another, it's a completely different landscape. It's dramatic. Anyway, those layers there, I'm going to propose to you an idea that you can, we're going to follow Nicholas Steno's approach and see how credible it is to break up Earth history into these three major periods there. So I just drew some red lines across there. And I think you can call the ones under that red line pre-flood rocks. All the layered rocks, most of them in the view there are flood strata. And then the ones on the tip top are post-flood rocks in that particular view. Right? And I want to see if we can make a case for this. And see if it's reasonable to believe that, or am I trying to pound a round peg in a square hole here because I'm a Christian, I want to believe the flood, and I want to presuppose it and force the data to think that. No, I'm not into that. All right, how reasonable is it to suppose this could happen? Right? 11 evidence. Okay. Yeah. Number one. The strata in Grand Canyon is not a record of ancient life, it's a record of death. Number two, I'm going to go through each one, I'm going to develop each one. A record of ocean above the continent, clear testimony of that. Clear testimony of an extraordinarily widespread sedimentary record, of a singular record of global scale erosion at the beginning of the flood, I think. A record of long distance transport, a record of relentless sedimentation, a record of tectonic upheavals, only two of them that mark the beginning and the end of this fossil bearing succession. profound, right? A catastrophic sedimentary record, you know, that you can see was the product of hydraulic intensity. Number 10,